Hey, my name's Matt, and I'm here to review Blue Moon Legends, a re-implementation of a game that came out a long time ago called Blue Moon. Apparently, you don't already know how good or bad this game is, and you need some help. That's what I'm here for. This is most of what's included in the game. That would be 9 separate character decks and a board in the middle. Here's an example of one of the character decks in the game. It comes with one leader card showing the faction that you're playing, along with some deck building guidelines, and then a collection of character cards, support cards, and other various tricks, leadership cards, so you can try to beat your opponent. Most cards, especially character cards, consist of the following elements. They got a name up here. They have a special ability text, or not. They've got firepower and earth power. And then these symbols over here, or these slots are for symbols that have various special effects. And then they have a number of moons in the lower left that's only for deck building. They have the starting faction they belong to and a faction alignment symbol. And then some flavor text, which may or may not be sweet. This is the game set up for 2 players, Volca versus Hoax. We've got our leaders over on the left, our decks in the draw pile, and our starting 6-card hands, plus 3 dragons in the center that we'll be fighting over. I'll be doing a quick game overview before I get to the nitty-gritty. The game is basically a series of battles over control of these dragons. On your turn, if there's nobody in the combat area, you can choose to either start a fight, which means play a character out there and get the ball rolling, or you can decline to start a fight, discard between 1 to 3 cards, and give your opponent the opportunity to start a fight. There are, of course, strategic reasons to do either, but I'll just start a fight. To start a fight, you basically have to take one of your character cards and put them in the combat area. Since you're starting, you can't use any of these sweet booster or support cards. So I'll go ahead and pick this character, put them in the combat area. Then you resolve their special power text. During my end phase, I can draw 2 additional cards. Okay, I'll do that later. And then, as you start the fight, you get to pick whether or not the battle will be in fire or in earth. Since I'm the Volca deck and they're all about fire, I'm going to pick fire. So the Blue Moon Legends came with a cool reminder card to let everybody know what element everyone's fighting for. There's the fire side. That's the earth side. Now, the entire battle will all be fought with the fire values on the cards that we play, as opposed to the earth values. My deck, hint hint, has got a lot stronger fire values. The phases of a turn are printed here on the board, so I'm already past the power phase, which I just did. I announced my power. Now I get to refresh, which makes me refill my hand up to 6. But, oh wait, I get to draw an additional 2 cards during my end phase. Bam, bam. And my turn's over. Now my opponent, the Hoax, who is also me for this review, has 2 choices. They can either A, try to match my power in the chosen element, in this case 2 fire, with a combination of a character and a support or booster card, or they can retreat. The ramifications of retreating are that I win the combat, and whoever wins combat attracts one of these nifty-looking dragons over to their side. Since that's the object of the game, you don't want to retreat willy-nilly. So, as the Hoax, I can play this character card, who has 2 fire that matches the other 2 fire. Plus, they have a special ability. If I retreat, you cannot attract dragons. Special abilities are always in play as long as the text is readable, since when you put a new combat card in your combat area on top of the old combat cards, it supersedes them. But, in addition to playing a character card, I can also play a support card. So, support cards are kind of like enchantments in Magic the Gathering, where they stay in play for the entire battle and keep messing your opponent up. And I'll play this support card, which is a fairly powerful one, that says, on your turn, you cannot play more than 1 card. I guess now's the time to get into this part of the game. The game uses a weird vernacular where If it says you or your, it's literally talking to your opponent. And if it says I or me, it's literally talking to you. It takes a little bit to get used to, but once you do, it makes things very clear. Alright, so the Hoax played their character, which you have to, every turn, or you have to retreat. They played their support card just to mess with me, and they refilled their hand to 6 cards. And now it's my turn. And once again, the onus is on me to either match their power or retreat. They have 2 firepower, but now they have that special ability in play where if they retreat, I don't get to attract a dragon. That's not going to make me want to devote a bunch to this battle. So, what I'm going to do is retreat. For a few reasons strategically. One, I don't want to waste a card trying to beat that card, because if I play a low one, they will easily be able to get the advantage over me and win the dragon later, or possibly more. And if I play a high one, they'll just retreat without me attracting one of these dragons, and I will lose a good card that I put out there. So I retreat. When somebody retreats, all cards in all combat areas just go to the discard pile, and whoever didn't retreat attracts one of these nifty dragons. You can pick whichever one you want, although in the basic game, it doesn't really matter. And now whoever retreated gets to play the first card for the next battle, and so on. The winner is the person who either A, already has 3 dragons on their side of the board, or B, when one person runs out of cards in their draw deck in their hand, if whoever has more dragons on their side wins. This sounds pretty simple, right? And it is. Now, the strategy comes from the fact that this is a push your luck style game. Because if at any time you have 6 total cards in your combat area and your support area, and this counts all cards that you've played throughout the entire battle, added up, then when you win, you get to attract 2 dragons instead of 1. So it becomes a sort of game of brinksmanship and deciding when to hold them and when to fold them. Because you want to win every battle, but you don't want to give your opponent 2 dragons. Now on to the actual review portion of the game. I'll be starting with the components. The game is basically an ass load of cards, skinny little board in the middle, and 3 plastic dragons. So there's not many components to review. The cards themselves have a nice linen finish on them, and they're pretty nice. Now the original Blue Moon had these big tarot style cards, so the artwork could be on primary display. These smaller cards I actually like a little bit better. First, I like the layout of them, which hasn't really changed much, but it's changed enough and it's improved. And it's a lot easier to sleeve if you're into sleeving. I'm not, but they're also a lot easier to shuffle as well. The art in the game is actually pretty slick. First of all, a different artist illustrated the entirety of each faction of the game. So every faction as a whole looks like it belongs together. So every single one of these aqua cards looks like it could exist alongside every single one of these aqua cards. Whereas these mimics cards, who are made by somebody completely different, all look like they belong in the same universe as well. Not only is it nice to look at, but it also gives each deck kind of a thematic cohesiveness. The board is utilitarian and basically exactly like the old board. It's got the areas laid out in specific spots so you can easily tell at a glance exactly what card's supposed to be doing what. And it's got a turn overview on both sides of the board that face both ways so players can easily look at them and tell exactly what they're supposed to be doing. It also came with this card, which is actually a lot handier than I thought it would be. It's, once a fight has started and you name your element, you either flip it to the earth side or the fire side, and it stays on that side until somebody changes it or the fight's over. It's a really good visual reminder about what everyone is fighting for. The game also comes with these 3 plastic dragons, which are entirely superfluous. They could have used anything for the dragons that you attract. They could have used little cardboard tokens, they could have used wooden pegs, but instead they decided to make these sweet, uniquely sculpted dragons. These are actually quite a large improvement from the original Blue Moon set. The original Blue Moon, the dragons all looked exactly the same. They were small, kind of rectangular. These ones are all individual sculpts, and have a little bit more personality to them, and they all look quite impressive, especially considering the fact that they did not need to be nearly this nice. They just did it for something cool to fight over. Bravo. Mechanically, the game is very simple. I mean, you pick an element and then you fight over that element until somebody wins and attracts a dragon. Now, of course, just like in all games of this type, the complexity comes from card interactions. Now, the game comes with 9 decks, and these are the original 9 decks from the Blue Moon series. They are arranged mostly by faction, but have a couple out-of-faction cards, and they're built specifically with balance in mind. The game includes all kinds of variants and different ways to play, including ways to do deck building, and drafting, and all kinds of stuff. But just the basic game itself, with the decks out of the box, is extremely balanced and very fun. Each combat is basically a battle of wills, as both of you push your hardest, or not, to win that battle and attract those dragons, but also you don't want to go too hard and have them just retreat. You get one dragon, and then they save all their good cards to attract more dragons in the future. It's a game where knowledge of the decks is quite powerful, which is why I pretty much recommend that you go with the starting decks basically always. Even if you're an expert in this game, I feel that the game is stronger just by using the starting decks, because you have that element of prediction and understanding where you have to double think yourself. Like, I could play the 6 fire, but I know he still has that mutant in his deck somewhere that can switch the battle between fire and earth, and I don't want to blow my entire load on this battle. Now, with deck building, there's other ways it can be fun, because you can trim and tailor and all that stuff, but it loses that element because they can kind of have anything at their disposal. Plus, it's not nearly as easy to break down, pull out, and this game is designed with only one person needing the set for 2 people to play. A lot of the strategy in this game comes from when you want to push extra hard to get those 2 dragons, or when you want to back off so your opponent can't get that same opportunity. Because that is, in essence, the strategic hook of the game, is that when you have 6 cards or more devoted to your side of the battle, you win 2 dragons if you win the fight. So you're simultaneously trying to prevent your opponent from getting that leverage, and also making it so if that ever happens with you, you want to be in the most advantageous position possible. So right now I have 4 cards in my area because I have 3 previously played combat cards plus my support card, and I really want to push it to 6 so I can get some extra stuff from when I win. So I'll throw out this big fire right now, and then this extra support card. So that creates a total of 6 cards there, and is a very disadvantageous battle state for the opponent, because A, it's a fairly strong fire value, B, he can't take cards from his draw deck, and C, if he retreats, I attract an additional dragon. So I just took a battle that was didn't have very high stakes at all, and turned it into an extreme winner-take-all scenario here. All because I made that push at a crucial moment. When you attract dragons to your side, if all the dragons are in the center, or you're the only one with dragons, then you attract dragons from the center. If you attract dragons and the opponent has a dragon, then you actually attract them from the center, from their side into the center. That way, only one person will ever have dragons. That's why at the end of the game, if you have any dragons on your side at all, you win. because only one person can ever have them. If all the dragons are in the center, then whoever ran out of cards last won. This actually creates a really interesting dichotomy with the Endgame, because almost every single game, unless you got destroyed, will end with the draw deck of one player running out. And it's exactly when they trigger these endgame conditions that will pull a I was going to lose to I just barely won, or vice versa. Because you can decline to start a battle and discard 3 cards from your hand, or up to 3 cards from your hand. So you can end the game kind of anywhere within those last 3 turns, depending on how much strength you think you have and how well you can think you can beat those dragons. But also, you're trying to get to run your opponent out of cards, because if there's no dragons on anybody's side in the center of the table, and they run out first, then you actually win the game. So the end game and exactly when you run out and how you run out is a huge strategic component to the game of Blue Moon. The game also comes with these gigantic crystals. They're really quite big. And the game, this is an element that disappoints me of the rulebook, is that it lists this way to play as a variant, and it's an optional, and it's only found in the very end of the Advanced Concepts book, which isn't even the rulebook. And it's back here under Tournament Rules, and a thing called Multiple Games that says can be played over a series of games. This is wrong, because the game should be and is meant to be played in this multiple series of games. That is where the strategic consideration comes in. Because at the end of the game, you get 1 crystal for winning, and then 1 crystal for each dragon you had on your side when you won. Of course, this number can be 0, because you can win with no dragons on your side as long as they ran out of cards first. And whoever gets to 5 crystals first is the winner, which makes it much more of a difference losing the game when they have 3 dragons on their side and losing the game just because you managed to run out of cards. It leads to more strategic decisions on to end the game in a spot where you minimize your losses or maximize your victory. Otherwise, who cares how many dragons you have on your side? Attracting extra dragons is pointless and really doesn't have any extra strategic value. So the game entirely is meant to be played through the multiple game scenario, and it's disappointing that the rulebook lists this under Tournament Rules as a can-be-played option. Earlier, I said the game was balanced, and I was right. The game is pretty balanced. Is it perfectly balanced? No. First of all, just like in any faction-based game, you can and will get bad matchups. The mimics are extremely weak against the kind. It just has to do with what type of things they're doing in the game and what type of things they can do to their opponent. That's acceptable. Now, there is a range of power. It's very small, and Knizia did a great job balancing these factions to the point where any of them can be viable. But this is the most powerful faction in the game, as the decks are built out of the box. And this is the weakest faction out of the box. Now, interestingly enough, the weakest faction out of the box actually has one of the best chances to defeat the strongest faction out of the box. It's actually a pretty favorable matchup for the weakest deck, which is, I don't know if he did that on purpose, but it's quite interesting. But in general, this deck, the Pillar deck, is disadvantaged in more matchups, and the Terra deck is advantaged in more matchups. Now, this can and will be circumvented by good play on either side. I mean, just because the Terra has an advantage in a matchup against, say, the Flit, doesn't mean they're going to win, especially if the Flit player is canny, understands the decks, and knows what they have to do to defeat the Terra player. But that is there, and I'm putting that out there, that the decks are not perfectly balanced. They're just really balanced. The game comes with what originally was an expansion deck, the Bucka, which is the 9th deck of the game. And it is a cool deck and has a lot of cool new mechanics, but that's the problem, is that almost everything in this deck is kind of new and completely different to this faction, including bluff cards and ships that you can land a bunch of their cards on, and it's pretty wild and wacky. You can end up getting some huge combat values, but the games against the Bucka usually end quicker than most because they're loading a boatload of guys onto their boats and putting them out in the battle at the time. So I personally don't find the Bucka to be as good as the original 8 decks. They're still fun to play, though, just not as fun. Oh, but wait, there's more. Actually, quite a bit more. The game comes with every single expansion that was ever released for the original Blue Moon, which includes all kinds of extra types of cards if you're into deck building. There's various different types of cards that you can slot into your decks, like these spirit cards, or these interference cards, which actually allow you to do stuff during your opponent's turn. And it includes these Inquisitors, which actually you can choose at the beginning of a game, and it affects your deck building in a fundamental way. It lets you add a certain number of cards and a certain number of moons, which is out of faction strength that you can add to your deck, and may or may not have persistent ability that helps you throughout the game. Of course, Inquisitors that give you less cards and less moons are going to give you more powerful abilities, whereas this guy who gives you 15 moons, which lets you basically build a deck entirely out of faction, and 10 cards, has no other abilities whatsoever. And if you want to play kind of a light deck building experience, at the beginning of the game, after each player chooses what deck they're going to be playing, you get to choose one of 4 emissaries. Each emissary has basically a little mini pre-made add-on pack with a bunch of different types of cards that you will be putting into your deck. You'll also be adding 3 extra faction-specific cards into your deck that come with the game. So you'll get an extra 10 cards, 7 specifically built emissary packs cards, and then 3 faction cards, making your deck 40 cards instead of 30. This is actually the way I most recommend playing deck building in the game if you want to customize your decks a little more or have more variety in the experience. Because A, it's a lot easier to take apart and put together when you want to play normal next time or put it back in the box. You don't have to go back through, sort everything out again. You just take out the emissary cards that match this faction symbol and the 3 extra cards that came with your faction. And you can put these basically with any deck and mix and match and draft them at the beginning of the game. So this is the way I most recommend playing any sort of deck building if you want to do that deck building sort of thing. Now, it does add weird types of cards into the game, like these interference cards, which I don't necessarily recommend because they allow you to do things out of turn and stuff like that, and turn this game in kind of a Magic the Gathering slugfest. I'm not saying they're not interesting. I'm just saying play the game a lot first before you play with these. Because really, you can play this base game possibly an infinite number of times and it's still interesting every time. So it's time for my final thoughts on the game. And here are my final thoughts. This game is very good. It is a fairly quick playtime if you only go for a 1 game, which you should not be doing. You should always be playing the series with the crystals. But even then, it doesn't take too long, maybe an hour for an entire series. The decks are all fun. They all follow specific themes and are just they're really cool in their individual play styles. They're balanced, and the game has nearly limitless replayability. I have played this against people. I've played this against AI on the computer, and even that is fun as heck, just with all the permutations of decks and the strategy that goes into playing. The production value is pretty good on the cards, on the board, on these dragons. And the price is pretty good as well. It's $50, which is not super cheap, although I'm sure you can get it cheaper online, probably $32-ish. And there's a lot of cards that come in the game, a lot of different decks, which if you had bought the original editions, would have cost you a lot more buying each one individually. And it's got just a ton of game in this box. Now, if you're looking for a quick-ish two-player game that you want to play repeatedly against some person, this is an extremely good choice. Now, if you just want to bust this out every once in a while at parties, it's not going to have the same pizzazz or oomph because you won't learn the decks. You won't be playing against the same opponent and getting into their head, and you won't really be experiencing a lot of what the game has to offer. So, if this is only going to be a purchase and play on my birthday every year, I wouldn't necessarily recommend it. This highly benefits repeated plays, and play it repeatedly you should, because it's interesting, it's fun, it's strategic, and it never, never, ever gets old. That's Blue Moon Legends, y'all. Peace.